and Kadia will go at the end. So Rohan, you should go after May. And if Kadia is not here, then we'll just do her presentation some other time. Okay, but let's put a chair here.
Are all the mics on up there?
Oh, are all your mics on? Can you? Hello? Yes? Okay, great. Okay, and obviously you're going to have to pass the mics back and forth. Okay. All right. Okay, we're going to start our first panel, and it is Climate Change and the Environment. Each student fellow will have 10 minutes to talk about their project, and then we'll have a Q&A. So please hold your questions until the end, and then we really welcome a lot of questions, and we want to have a discussion at the end of the session. We're also encouraging everyone to tweet. You may notice you have a packet that has the schedule, but it also has everybody's Twitter handle, the school handle, and we'd love to have you tweet as much as you want to tweet. So please. Oh, yes. Jim's reminding me. Okay, over there we have the Pulitzer Center Weekend 18 hashtag. So when you do tweet, use the hashtag, please. No center. Sorry, did I say center? Okay. Pulitzer, okay, everybody look at it just so you can see and don't listen to me. Pulitzer Weekend 18. Okay, and when you start, I'm not going to introduce all of you now, so what I'd like you to do, Kiley, is say your name and your school before you begin your presentation. Okay, great. Okay. Let's go. Can I stand? Yes. Yes.
Hi everyone, my name is Kiley Price and I'm a senior at Wake Forest in North Carolina. And as Wake Forest Pulitzer Fellow, I traveled to Thailand for 3.5 weeks to study the role of Buddhist monks in the Thai environmental movement. So yeah, that was my presentation. So my piece was published in Manga Bay originally, and then in Asian Correspondent, Pacific Standard, and also the Thai Embassy, which I didn't originally know about until one of my sources sent it to me. I also recently had a video published in Manga Bay, and they were really instrumental in helping me spread the news, so thank you to them. So before and after my 3 wonderful weeks in Thailand, my single most asked question was, how did you even find this topic to report on? And the answer is that it kind of just fell right into my lap. So I'm a biology major and I have a passion for protecting the environment, and I'm always coming across new and exciting ways to protect the environment and conservation in general. And I've seen machines that are pulling CO2 from the air and bioacoustic sensors that are monitoring ecosystem health. But probably the most unique strategy I've ever come in contact with is something called a tree ordination, which is right there. So from the outside, this photo probably just looks like an old tree wrapped in an orange cloth. But in reality, this tree was actually ordained as a Buddhist monk, and it was deemed sacred and protected from deforestation and human harm. I took this photo in Chiang Mai, Thailand, as I hiked up something called the Monk's Trail. And the Monk's Trail is lined something called the Dasutep Mountain, which is a cultural and religious center for a lot of the people in Chiang Mai. And at the top of the mountain lies one of their holiest temples, and that's where people go to worship and pray daily. But recently, the executive government of Thailand came in and leveled a lot of the bottom of the forest at the mountain, and to clear off land for a housing project. However, this tree and a lot of others like it remained untouched and protected by this little cloth that holds a lot of meaning. So in the Buddhist religion, one of the things that they follow is called the Four Noble Truths. And one of these noble truths is to end suffering. And a group of activist monks in Thailand are called ecology monks, and they've expanded this truth into ending the suffering of the environment. So through rituals like tree ordinations, ecology monks are integrating Buddhist principles into the environmental movement and to encourage sustainable practices and gain more support from their followers. However, rituals are not the only thing that they're doing. So over the past couple of decades, development in Thailand has increased a lot, but that's brought with it a host of environmental problems. Big companies like CP All Public, which runs all of the 7-Elevens in Thailand, are hiring contract farmers to only plant one type of crop, like maize or rice in this case. But this depletes the soil of a lot of its nutrients and is actually really harmful. And also land rights are being taken away from a lot of the indigenous communities in the area. And they're originally the people that protect the forest, and now it's being taken away from them. But ecology monks are stepping up as environmental advocates to prevent any more of this excessive destruction. And I went to Thailand to see if they were actually making an impact. So the bulk of my reporting was in Bangkok, and then I headed to Chiang Mai, Chonburi, which is down here, and Serene. And in Bangkok, I was able to interview the director of an organization called the International Network of Engaged Buddhists, or INEB for short. And INEB's mission is to connect activist Buddhists throughout all of Asia that are involved in social change movements like indigenous rights, like I talked about earlier, economic injustices, and of course the environment. The director explained that there's over 25 countries involved in this organization, but a lot of its members are often met with controversy. So the Buddhist religion is typically famed for its detachment from society, and activist monks are going directly against this principle to help those in need. Many ecology monks like this one have been arrested, kidnapped, or even assassinated for the work that they're doing, and how they're speaking out against big businesses and helping in protests. In 2005, a monk named Praku Supaj Subakana, who's an ecology monk based in Chiang Mai, was assassinated when he was trying to prevent the land around a meditation center from being converted into a tangerine farm, which is the same issue as the monocropping I was talking about earlier. So many of my sources had to remain off the record for part of our interviews because a lot of what they were saying they could have been like persecuted for or even in harm's way. So I had to leave out a couple things. But their work still carries on. So for 1 week, I was given the opportunity to live in a Buddhist temple in Chonburi and profile one of the more prominent ecology monks, whose name is Praseng Kham, and this is him right here. So Praseng Kham runs an alternative farming school out of his temple and currently has 49 full-time students. In his teachings, he mixes a lot of Buddhist concepts of personal reflection with something called sufficiency economy, which was developed by their previous king. But sufficiency economy encourages subsistence farming, self-sufficiency, and a detachment from material goods, which is one of the biggest principles in the religion itself. So in Thai villages like this one, which is in Chonburi, the Buddhist temple acts as the heart of a community, and this is where people go to seek guidance in all aspects of life, including how to farm. So with such an immense amount of influence among the public, monks like Praseng Kham are using this position to add a more moral dimension to the environmental movement. I will admit, though, that I had a lot of misconceptions going into this about Buddhist monks, because after I studied them in school, I was thinking that they would be more stoic and meditative and kind of removed from the public. But monks like Praseng Kham and a lot of the ones I met over the course of my reporting proved that that was not the case. So Praseng Kham was constantly working in the field to help people develop new techniques to protect the environment, but he was also on multiple occasions helping put out forest fires like this one, planting crops himself, and even fixing excavators that were used for agriculture. He was also in the process of a speaking tour while I was there throughout different provinces in Thailand. And in this one, we were in Serene, and he was speaking to an audience of over 100 people who were trying to figure out how they could develop their new farming techniques. And in this particular panel of speakers, there was a business owner, a nurse, and a scientist. But each person was met with just as much respect and attention as the last, which is really indicative of how important both science and religion is to the Thai community. As the monk, along with a lot of others, told me more about what they were doing, I tried to remain skeptical because, as the saying goes, seeing is believing. But eventually my skepticism was met with proof. So in Serene, which is where this town was, Praseng Kham was able to show me his thriving farm that he had developed using his technique of sufficiency economy. along with 6 other farms in the area. And so I'm going to show you a little video on his farm and how he developed it. See if I can get
This was we talking about design, like a biosphere design for the harmony people to live. We had a lot of food, you know, mango, banana tree, and big fruit, and rice fields, and also we have the fish pond. We organize and try to make the lands look like the Eden's garden.
So I don't know if you were able to understand a lot of what he was saying, but he said Eden's garden at the end, which is actually just the Garden of Eden. He tried to relate a lot of like American different religion terms to me. But this was his farm right here, and he tried to plant as many different crops as possible so that you could be as self-sufficient as possible. But in bigger cities like Bangkok, there were different techniques that ecology monks used, such as Pra Win and Pra Samkit, who actually entered the political arena to affect policy change at a higher level. And then in Chiang Mai, which is a region with some of the worst deforestation in the whole country, the entire city is coming together to protest these environmental problems under a religious basis and prevent them from building on their holy mountain, which this is the temple that was at the top of it. So at a time when Pope Francis is calling upon these religious leaders to step up, like in his recent papal encyclical, it's clear that Thai Buddhists are answering the call. With worsening environmental conditions all throughout the world, it's important that every facet of society gets involved in this movement. And that's clear in Thailand that more monks are getting involved, but not just in rituals like tree ordinations, but in public works initiatives, sustainability campaigns, and new academic studies that are testing. So it turns out that this little scrap of orange cloth was actually the start to something much bigger. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Good. Thank you.
2 mics.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Jackie Flynn, and I did my project on the Cape Town water crisis. And I was really fortunate. Oh, and I go to TCU in Texas. I was fortunate enough to see almost the entire water crisis unfold. I was doing a study abroad program there from January until May, and then started my work for this fellowship afterwards and got to see the initial announcement of Day Zero, the domestic reaction within Cape Town and South Africa as a whole, and then how they eventually called off and overcame the water crisis. So before I get into my specific project, I wanted to go over a brief history of the water crisis because it's really important to know what led up to this situation. And the most important thing to note here is that they knew the water crisis was going to happen. It was no surprise that they were running out of water. They were going to face a severe drought. Their economy was booming with more people moving to the city. And it was an increase in the demand of water with a decrease of supply, and they knew they were going to run out. So you can see there was an article published in 1990 saying that Cape Town will run out of water in 17 years. So it was a known fact that they were going to run out of water. So when I got there and they announced Day Zero, this is the type of headlines I was seeing. This was an issue that was exhaustively reported on, but what I noticed was a lot of the articles were talking about what were going to happen when the taps turned off, and not a lot of people were talking about why the taps were turning off and what we could be doing to prevent this from happening in other places. And it's important to note, too, that Cape Town is definitely not the first place in the world to run out of water. There's still a lot of areas in the world where people don't have access to clean drinking water. But Cape Town is the first fully developed city to overcome a water crisis. So that's why I really wanted to look into how they did that and also direct it to a U.S. audience because we're a very consumer-based society. We don't think about our water use very often. We flush our toilets with clean water. So we could be doing a lot to prevent a situation like this happening. Oh, I'm going to skip this slide. But this was pretty much a letter I got from the government saying not to go to Cape Town, and then I boarded a plane the next day. So you can't really see very well, but these are the water restriction levels. And these are really important to understand because it was government implemented, these water restrictions, to help decrease the water supply. They had already targeted agricultural use and industrial use of water. They had cut back by nearly 60%, but the residential use and the municipal water use by everyday citizens was going to be the hardest area for them to change and to target. So it was really hard for them to place these restrictions on people. And when you're looking at this chart, the beginning levels, those are like, you can't water your lawn for a certain time of day, you can't fill your swimming pool. But then when you get up to level 6, that's only 50 liters of municipal water a day. And to put that in perspective, your 10-minute shower uses 67 liters. So this was a really severe restriction on people, but it's actually very doable as well if you use the advice that the government was giving the citizens. They also talked a lot about gray water, which is something we're not very familiar with. It's any water that hasn't been contaminated with fecal matter. And this was used a lot. We could be using gray water to flush our toilets. We could be saving the rainwater from outside. We could be saving our water that we're using to wash our dishes to flush our toilets. And we can be repurposing it. We don't have to be using clean water for everything. And so that was a major change that people also made. And also imagine if they had implemented some of these tactics before the water crisis. They might have saved a lot more water. And that's a lot of what my project focused on, is that how we could implement those things here and make it policy for some of these permanent changes to be made to prevent a water crisis in the future. Something I also want to explain really quick is day 0 was going to be this level 7 up here. It's completely blended in. But day 0 was the day all municipal water would be shut off, and residents were going to have to go to one of 127 water collection points throughout the city to get their drinking water and all of the water that they were going to use. That did not end up happening, but they were a month away from that happening, and then they eventually called it off. So when we're looking at this strictly in Cape Town, there was a lot of layers to this issue. It was heavily racialized. South Africa is just coming out of the apartheid. 15 years ago, it's still segregated, even though it's not legally segregated. And you have a lot of informal settlements of poor black people without any access to municipal water living there. And that makes up a huge portion of Cape Town's population. And something that people don't really realize is the threat of day 0 wasn't even going to affect those people because they were already walking to water collection points. And then you had people in the wealthier areas that could afford to pay the fines if they went over the water restrictions. So it was very racially charged, and people were getting very upset in that sense over it. But you also had a very corrupt government that was handling the crisis. And the Cape Town government was heavily criticized because Cape Town's province is the only province in South Africa that's run by a separate political party than the rest of the country. So they were under a lot of scrutiny. The mayor, Patricia de Lille, was heavily criticized. And again, is a very charged topic to talk about to people. And then, so these pictures are of the Highland Spring. There were springs all over Cape Town that were available for people to go and get free, clean drinking water to supplement the water that they couldn't use due to the water restrictions. They were most of the time government regulated, so they would have guards to help people move along. You could really only take a certain amount of water at a time so that they could keep getting people to move through. But the Highland Spring was a completely homemade spring. Someone just walked by one day, found fresh drinking water, and set up a couple pipes and started filling up their water. And because there was no regulation, this became a really popular spring for people to go to. But with that came a lot of issues, and that's where you were hearing some of the stories of fights breaking out. There was some shootings there. So the government ended up closing down the spring. They put a cement slab over it, and that's pretty unfortunate because now nobody can use that water. But these pictures were taken a month apart. I went really early in the morning one day, but I went back later in the day, and it was a very, very busy line. And then this was it a month later after they had closed it up. So the people that I wanted to talk to, I wanted to get the loudest voices within the water crisis. I heard Helen Moffitt's name all the time. She was a huge activist for water conservation. Her home doesn't even have a water footprint. She lives in a suburb of Cape Town and just has harvested enough rainwater to keep herself going. And same with Justin Bonello. He is a celebrity chef in South Africa, and his entire property is self-sustainable. He uses all of his vegetables from his property and harvests all of his water. He said not a drop of water leaves his property. And then Craig was a dear friend of mine. He was just a local who would help connect me with more local people and listen to their stories. But he was very active in motivating his friends and family to change their waterways as well. So that was really interesting. Someone else who I did not put up here was someone in the water and sanitation department that I spoke with. And he said he was in charge of all the propaganda, which I'm about to get to. And he said sometimes you have to scare people to get them to listen, which is how we get to the Water Wise movement. So if you were in Cape Town at this point, you could not avoid the water crisis. There were signs on every bathroom stall, there were signs on every street corner asking you to conserve your water, reminding you what the water restriction level is, and there was just no ignoring it. So I think that was a really successful way for the government to change and really get people to listen to what they need to do to save water, because if you don't have water, you can't do anything. And I did a photo essay on some of the signs in Cape Town that we saw. This is right out of the airport, so it's the first thing you see, and it was an entire display right before it of the water restrictions and what that meant and how much they needed to save. This was in a bathroom. These are all over every bathroom. These are billboards along the N1 highway. Woolworths is the largest grocer in South Africa. They partnered with the Water and Sanitation Department to put up all their propaganda, live the 50-liter lifestyle in all of their stores. This was in a very popular tourist area. Someone drew a mural. And then this was right outside of my room that I stayed in. These are water collection tanks that can hold a ton of water. And I just keep thinking, like, if we had this in the United States, because I was just in Texas and we had 3 days of crazy rainstorms. There was standing water all over the place. And if we had collected it in one of these water bins, we could have been showering off of municipal water for months off of that. So my final point, and what my whole article was on, was why you should care. Drought is everybody's issue, whether we have it right now or not. The BBC article was about the next 11 major world cities to run out of water. They named Miami, London, major world cities, and if we don't implement some of these policies now, we're never going to be able to save our water. And it's the little changes that make the biggest difference. That's what I really wanted to hone in. It's possible to live on 50 liters of water if you make the smart choices. And yeah, I have pamphlets if anybody wants them for ways you can save your water. But thank you so much for listening.
Click to the right, Jim. Try it. Click to the right.
Oh, set that down. There we go. Hi everyone, very nice to be here. I'm Tomas Woodall Posada, and I'm from Forsyth Tech in North Carolina. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience in Puerto Rico with the grassroots organizations post-Maria. So first I'm going to share some background information about the hurricane itself. So Hurricane Maria struck Puerto Rico on September 20th, 2017. The preceding storms, Irma and Jose, cooled the ocean surface north of Puerto Rico. Meanwhile, discharge from South American rivers lowered ocean surface salinity, thus raising the temperature below Puerto Rico. This set the stage for a storm with a uniquely powerful south wall. So as you can see, the storm just completely engulfs the island, with sustained winds 30 miles per hour, worse than Katrina. To make things worse, right before the storm hits the island, it actually stalls and intensifies, making the destruction really bad for the island. And of course, there was severe erosion on the island's coastline, which the tourism economy took a hard hit for that. And Puerto Rico's residents were hungry, without electrical power, and their homes had been destroyed. About 1.1 million households applied for disaster aid from FEMA. FEMA assisted only 58% of those households. So how did volunteer organizations respond to this crisis? Jose Andres is a Spanish chef and founder of World Central Kitchen. Jose and his team arrived in Puerto Rico 5 days after the hurricane and immediately devised a plan with the community and business leaders to break the logjam of gas and diesel deliveries, which was an essential step in activating restaurant kitchens. So on the first day of cooking, 1,000 meals were served. Several days later, 10,000 were served. Ultimately, Jose and his team served a total of 3.7 million meals. And on one day alone, they served 150,000 meals. Although I didn't have the pleasure to personally meet with Jose, I was really inspired by the mindset he brought. In an interview with NPR, Jose said, "What do we do? We bring bread from the mainland in the moment that the airport is in chaos and the ports are collapsed. Or you identify the bread factories and you help them with diesel and fuel to get back up." We partnered with local bakeries to make sure that those bakeries will be functioning sooner rather than later. This practicality really went a long way for the people of PR, and Jose and his team brought the expertise necessary to enable Puerto Ricans to become volunteer workers and leaders. So, Jose's team found ample water on the island, but a serious lack of public health information and a disregard for getting regular water supplies. Fortunately, the nonprofit organization Harimau Conservation was determined to fix this problem through their Rayo de Luna initiative. And so, in partnership with the Planet Water Foundation, Joaquim and his team installed 38 water storage and filtration towers around the island, with 3 more to be installed this November. Joaquim told me that the towers do not require electricity to function, making it a great resource considering the fragile electrical grid. Here's a map showing all the locations of all 38 towers currently on the island. The one that I visited is right here in an elementary school named Escuela Espino. Although the tower is located on school grounds, it can be accessed by anyone in the community. And again, we see that same approach, which is instead of simply gifting the communities with provisions and services, the volunteer groups are enabling the residents to play a bigger part in the reconstruction process. So I want to enter the group that's not only reconstructing houses, delivering food and supplies to residents, but also looking ahead to a more self-sustainable future they envision for Puerto Rico. Brigada Solidaria del Oeste, or Solidarity Brigade of the West, created the initiative Finca Solidaria, a coalition of farmers that donate their land to grow and harvest crops, which will then be distributed to communities around the area. I traveled with Sandra to this farm, located in the mountains of Limon, where we worked in the field for several hours. That day, Sandra and the others would often break out into song, and I really felt that this mirrored the demeanor of all the volunteer workers I met. They worked with diligence, but also with optimism, compassion for their cause, and solidarity with the Puerto Rican people. The hurricane was a very traumatic experience for many people on the island. I remember a faculty member at the University of PR describing the storm as a bomb going off almost continuously. The English word hurricane actually comes from the Taínos, who describe the storms as huracan, or god of evil. Although we don't refer to them in this way anymore, they're still very frightening. After my trip to PR, I can honestly say that the spirit of these volunteer workers is very strong, and they will continue to accomplish the tasks at hand in Puerto Rico. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Margaret Vatterott and I'm a master's student at the University of Missouri. So I got to spend a month in Mexico documenting how Mexico City's water crisis impacts the nearby indigenous communities. So Mexico City's water crisis, or their issues with water, basically began when the Spaniards built the city on top of the Aztecs' system of canals and rivers. But climate change has just made this issue worse. So today, Mexico City imports 40% of their water, and they get that water from nearby rural communities. And within those communities are the Mizawa indigenous community. And they live with the system, the water system's called the Cutzamala system. They live with this system like basically in their backyards, and it's been there for like the past 30 years. And they don't receive hardly any benefits of it. So you'll see, this is one of my characters, Margarita. So she's lived on the same land her whole life, and she remembers being a kid when the Mexico's Water Commission approached their family asking if they could buy some of their land so they could build part of the system. And so they sold part of their land to them, and today she still doesn't have running water, and every day she wakes up and she has to go get water for cooking and cleaning and drinking and everything for her family. So she has been fighting for these issues for the past 30 years, forever. And then this photo on the left is the Mizawa Front, which she's a part of. So that's the group that has organized, and they've been organized pretty much since 2004. In 2004, they had their first major protest where they tried to shut down part of the plant to demand better resources and access to the system. So this was when I was there in May. They were protesting again. They still feel left out, and they still don't have access to all the things they need. So they were in Toluca trying to speak to the state of Mexico's governor. So yeah, I am putting together a 20-minute film is where it's at right now, and it's almost complete. I'm waiting on one final interview. So I'm just going to have you all watch a 6-minute preview of what that is. Let's see.
Pues nada más que era una empresa que se dedicaba a enviar agua a la Ciudad de México. De que tendría que haber algún modo de que también nos beneficiáramos teniendo una planta tan cerca. Para ir a traer el agua, el tiempo que se hace uno, 1 o 2 horas para tener agua suficiente para todo el día. Somos huérfanos, murió mi papá, nos dejó por ejemplo yo de 2 años, entonces nos quedamos huérfanos con mi mamá. Cuando llegó el sistema Cutzamala, la comisión, les compraron los terrenitos, como todo, ya ve que cuando compran, pues llegan y la gente dice, no, pues me está pagando a buen precio. Después de ahí hice mi casita aquí porque mi mamá vivía allá, entonces, y yo esta casita la hice, ya le metimos luz, ahorita queremos el agua. Ahorita me doy tiempo, levanto temprano, organizo todo con ayuda de mi hija la grande. Voy a dejar a los niños a la escuela, yo me quedo aquí en la casa, recojo, hago la comida, veo los animales, veo la tienda, vamos por agua y eso, porque apurándonos, pues mi mamá diría, ¿por qué no pedimos? Cuando ellos llegaron, nos tendrían que haber dado todos esos beneficios a cambio de que ellos, tuvieran se plantaran aquí, pues, a cambio de eso, primero nos hubieran dado los beneficios a nosotros. Diría mi mamá, ¿por qué no les exigimos? ¿Por qué no les pedimos? Ahora ya, demasiado tarde.
Es muy lento, no es satisfactorio. ¿Por qué? Porque este tema tiene desde el 2004 y hoy están queriendo hacer lo mismo otra vez. Tenemos problemas en cada una de las comunidades porque la gente no cree en nosotros. Y luego nosotros, es más fácil que, aún estando viviendo aquí en la planta, permitimos todavía que la gente que no viene casi nos esté diciendo que somos chismosos, que no vamos a lograr nada. ¿Cómo vamos a convencer a la gente de afuera? Van a pasar las elecciones, van a ganar los que tengan que ganar y nosotros no vamos a ganar nada.
So that's basically just the first 6 minutes, and the rest of the film just kind of follows the front as they meet with the government and work to try to make some changes actually happen in their community, because they really have been waiting for 30 years for things to happen. So yeah, that's it. Thank you guys.
Yes, Jen. Or just skip through it until you get to yours. Keep going, yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Rohan Naik. I graduated from Yale in May and now work at the Documentary Group, which is a documentary film production company in New York City. So my project was looking at air pollution in London, and I chose to follow this for two different reasons. The first being, I hadn't really had the opportunity to pursue environmental journalism and was interested in pursuing a science-based topic and sort of understanding the hard science behind it, and then distilling that and making that more readily accessible to other folks. So that was the first reason I was interested in it. And the second reason I sort of chose London was because I was interested in exploring air pollution specifically in a country and city in the global north. So I think often when we talk about environmental issues and especially climate change, we're referring to places in the global south, but obviously climate change and air pollution are two issues that affect everyone everywhere. So I wanted to sort of look at it from that lens as well. So before I left for my trip, I wanted to do some pre-reporting, and I was really interested in understanding the history behind air pollution in London. And so one of the greatest, or one of the most well-known environmental disasters in British history is known as the Great Smog. This was also featured in an episode of The Crown, if anyone watches that show. But basically what this was a cloud of smog which enveloped the city of London for almost a week in December 1952. It was the result of sort of windless conditions combined with really cold air that allowed the smog to sort of stay suspended for such a long time, and was the product of factory emissions as well as coal fires in London. And in the immediate aftermath of the fog, there were almost 4,000 deaths, and it's estimated that an additional 8,000 died in the following years. And this was sort of a pivotal event in British environmental history that led to air pollution regulation, what's known as the Clean Air Act of 1956, which sort of led to the regulation of factory growth in London. So prior to this, London had very, very little environmental regulation and very little regulation as it related to air pollution. So it forced factories to move outside of the city and also made the switch from coal fires. So that took place in 1956, the Clean Air Act of 1956. There was another Clean Air Act in the 1960s. And by the 1980s, there was sort of the belief amongst a decent majority of people in London that air pollution was a thing of the past, and it was sort of a problem that they had solved, which wasn't quite the case, as I found out. So the question of how bad is air pollution in London today was sort of what I was focusing on. The Royal College of Physicians has estimated that it leads to about 40,000 early deaths a year. We've seen a rise in rates of asthma and wheezing illnesses. It's been termed a public health disaster by the city government. And really the nature of today's air pollution is really different than what we saw in the Great Smog in the 50s. So today is really, the majority of air pollution is from the advent of diesel motor vehicles, which have taken over the city. So really in particular, particulate matter and nitrogen dioxide. So particulate matter, which is really tiny particles that come from car emissions and road surface break wear, and then nitrogen dioxide. And just a couple of interesting facts about both of those two things. In terms of nitrogen dioxide, London has exceeded its estimated amount of nitrogen dioxide every year since 2010. And in terms of particulate matter, there were days in 2017 where London's air actually had a higher amount of particulate matter than Beijing, which is really interesting to think about given how much we see Beijing and air pollution in Beijing mentioned in the media and how infrequently we see London. And so the question sort of was, who does it affect, was something that I was interested in. And sort of in the Great Smog, it didn't really spare anyone. Everyone in the city, it sort of cut across racial and class boundaries. And thinking about the Great Smog as well, one thing I was interested in is whether memory of a recent environmental disaster influences modern public opinion on climate change regulation. So whether someone whose parent or grandparent experienced the Great Smog, if they're more likely to support air pollution regulations today. And really what I found was that wasn't the case, that people sort of relegated that event to the past and sort of viewed air pollution today as very distinct from what they had seen in the 1950s. And in a way, they're right, in that the nature of air pollution is very different. In the 50s in London, it was largely from factory emissions, and today it's largely from diesel vehicles. It's also interesting today that although it technically affects everyone, certain groups are particularly at risk. So children in particular are at risk for rising rates of asthma, wheezing illnesses, pneumonia, stunted growth. And you also see particular negative health effects in lower income neighborhoods of London. So in low income housing projects are often clustered off of main roads in neighborhoods in London. And those individuals who live there are more frequently exposed to higher rates of air pollution. So the question sort of, is there hope? Sort of a broad question, but London's mayor has really led the charge in terms of tackling air pollution. He has used terms like public health disaster, a national crisis, so has used some of the most forceful language around air pollution and environmental issues in the country. He's also created a $1 million or £1 million campaign to fight air pollution in cities, has introduced clean air zones. So what that means is designated parts of the city that diesel vehicles aren't allowed in, which encourages carpooling and encourages people to move away from purchasing and using diesel vehicles. Additionally, we've seen Client Earth, which is an environmental law nonprofit based around the world, has fought this issue in the courts, specifically arguing that the British government has violated the European Union air quality standards, and they, I believe, have sued the government 3 times in the past 10 years, winning each time. We've also seen activism in numerous forms in London, so both larger nonprofits and more grassroots activism. One interesting thing to note about activism is that larger nonprofits have really focused on the danger that air pollution poses, to children, while grassroots activists have really taken the charge on letting the public know how air pollution really specifically affects lower income communities, communities of color, and immigrant communities. A lot of these communities who live in these lower income housing projects that are sort of off of main roads. And there is sort of a split within activist movements in terms of what's the best way to raise awareness. So we see sort of the larger nonprofits, which are highlighting the issue of children's health, and then more grassroots protests, which are highlighting the threat that these have to lower income communities and communities of color. So the question is it enough? It's not really clear yet. I think that people in London seem to be very aware of the threats of air pollution, given the Great Smog and given how present it is in the media. But with Brexit looming in the next year as well, London will no longer be held to EU air quality standards, so it'll be sort of on its own without sort of a watchdog for it. So I think it's definitely a story for us all to keep our eyes peeled for within the next year.
Great, that was really well done presentation. Let's open it up to questions. Does anybody want to start off? Yes.
Hi there. For Jackie with the project from South Africa, which was fascinating. All the projects were very fascinating. From what you saw taking place with different organizations in Cape Town fighting to avert this problem and to ameliorate it and to stop it, what do you think that other cities could learn from this case study of Cape Town? What are other cities in the future, like maybe Mexico City or, who knows, Miami? What are they going to take away from this initial, example of an extreme situation like this?
Yeah, definitely. Well, there is a lot that there could be done, but I think what the most important thing that should be happening is at a government level, there should be policy made to either redesign the water systems that we have or going forward implementing different water systems to implement the use of gray water into like our bathrooms. Like it just blows my mind that we use clean drinking water to flush our toilets. We should not be doing that. And implement more rain collection tanks, just using our resources and making it regulated so that it's required for everybody, and just putting more of an effort into it, because right now I don't really think it's much of a discussion, and it should be.
Here we go. And if you could say your name and your school. And stand up.
Hi, my name is Amanda Gordon. I'm from Westchester Community College. My question is for, I'm going to butcher your name, so sorry, Rohan? Rohan? Okay, Rohan. So why do you think it is that people assume that air quality is a thing of the past? Is it because it's a visibility thing now, or
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a great question. I think so, specifically with regards to London, sort of the air quality issues of the early 20th century that have been popularized and are more well known. Those were, like you said, very much experiences that you would walk outside and you would feel it immediately. You really couldn't see anything. And so the nature of air pollution today in London is a little bit different, where you can walk outside and not necessarily feel or notice a difference, but the air quality can actually still be quite low. So I think it's sort of a sensory experience to an extent.
Thank you. Yes, here we go.
All right, I had a question for Rohan as well.
Your name?
Correct. Brandon Nichols, I'm from City Colleges of Chicago. And as a follow-up to about the smog, I know you had mentioned that as far as kind of populations, well, stakeholders that's at risk, such as children, and you also mentioned about the low-income families. Is it more so just their access to healthcare or different resources, or what variables were you able to kind of uncover as to why, what about low-income households that are creates higher risk?
Yeah, definitely. It's, so yeah, I think it's tied to a whole host of factors. Well, I think one is geographical location and actual physical housing. So housing projects, which are often in London, clustered off of main roads. So people are more likely to experience air pollution, or like the worst aspects of air pollution, exhaust emissions every day and can't escape it, whereas other people go to work maybe in a polluted area of the city, but then leave work and then go back to their home in the suburb. And so these individuals don't necessarily get to experience that if they're living right off of a main road. And I think also, just in general, tied to a whole host of other socioeconomic factors, one being diet as well. So people who have less choice in their diet are often not exposed or not eating the right amount of antioxidants, which could help against the health effects of air pollution.
I had a question about the different roles that men and women play. And Kiley, you were talking about the Buddhist monks. What role do women play? And Meg, you talked, I think we saw mostly women. And I was wondering if you could maybe speak about the role of men. Both of you were talking about protecting Indigenous rights.
Yeah, so in the Buddhist community right now, it is pretty male-dominated because only men can be monks. Actually, recently they've kind of expanded into
And they have nuns.
Yeah,
right?
they do have nuns, but they're definitely not as well-respected in the community. They do hold a higher standard of respect, but just not as high as the monks. There's a lot of different traditions. I noticed while I was there that did feel like maybe a little bit sexist. Like women, for example, aren't allowed to touch monks at all. Like I wasn't allowed to shake their hand or even give them a gift from my hand. It had to be put on a towel first, and then they could pull it over. As I wasn't really giving them gifts. But in the temple specifically, I noticed that women were kind of the caretakers of the whole temple. So they had a couple women that were also running a lot of field work. They had farming outside, and then they were also taking care of all of the children that were under the care of them. So it's kind of like in the background, you do see all of the women, but at the forefront, I think that the monks are using their position, like I said in my presentation, kind of to their advantage because they have such a high platform right now, and they're putting a more moral dimension to the whole movement. So it's less about like, here's the scientific dangers of climate change and environmental problems, and it's more about like, now it's becoming a religious duty to protect the environment.
For the Misawa, the women became to have like a greater role in the movement around 2004 when they shut down the plant temporarily. The women felt like the government wasn't listening to the men who were in charge. So they're like, okay, like we're gonna do something, and so they like organized as a group of women and were the main people who did that protest in 2004. And also, I just think that the women, what I noticed is that the women are the ones who really have to struggle with the effects of having lack of access to the system. They're the ones who have to wake up every day to get the water for their families. So they really experience it firsthand, so I think it is important that they now have a greater role in the movement.
Okay. Yes.
from Boston University, and my question is for Kiley. You mentioned the International Network of Engaged Buddhists, and I was just wondering if you knew or if you could elaborate on some of the other initiatives they're taking part in that region of the world.
So you mean like besides environmental work?
Yes, or both.
Yes. So going back to the indigenous rights, right now there's a lot of different. So their government 4 years ago went into a coup, and it's kind of being run by the military right now. So there are a lot of problems that can't necessarily. Yeah, I feel like mine isn't really as loud. But there are a lot of problems that aren't really being addressed by the government. So the monks are stepping up in different arenas. So they just developed a national parks infrastructure, but that's pushing a lot of the community, like the indigenous communities, out of their land that they've lived in for centuries. So this network right now is trying to figure out like different ways that other places in Asia have like helped this. So they're trying to kind of give advice to Thailand. I'm trying to think of the other involved. So a lot of it is about like feminist work. And they're trying, like, you can join the network and not be Buddhist. So they're trying to like mix politics with like different people throughout Asia. It was difficult to understand at such a wide scale, but once he kind of broke it down to different like movements, which he obviously focused more on the environment for me, it was clear that they were having more of an effect just because in Asia, and especially in Thailand, religion is so important. There's like, the statistic right now is there's over 93% of people who identify themselves as Buddhists in Thailand. And it's so integrated into their government too, so it was impressive to see.
Questions? Yes. There you go. Argentina?
Yeah. Thank you. Hi, my name is Argentina, and I'm from Gutman Community College. It's for Meg. I don't know if you mentioned it in the film, but I was wondering, I was confused. Who bought the land, and what was the government's response to the women's group?
Yeah. So the government was who bought the land to build the water system. They call it the Kutsamala system. So that was the Water Commission. And then in 2004, they did receive like some of the demands that they asked for, but like for people like Margarita and her family, they still don't have access to water. And this is where it became interesting for me, is because they're using this water as like a political tool to better their communities and get other resources as well. Like they want better sewage systems, they want better roads, they want better access to hospitals. So now they're not only asking for just access to the system, but they're asking for more resources as well. So, yeah.
I had a question for both of you because you both dealt with the water crisis, South Africa and Mexico. So when you were listening to each other's presentations, I mean, did you see similarities in the way the crisis is being dealt with, or what?
I don't think Mexico's doing anything really much to conserve. Like, it doesn't really seem like they're just kind of like, yeah, we're just going to keep drilling for more. We're just going to keep making this system more expansive, which I think they could be using more of the solutions that they were using in Cape Town.
I think what you were just saying about how the government's using the water as a political tool, that's very similar in South Africa as well. Like I mentioned in the presentation, the Cape Town province, the Western Cape, is the only province in South Africa that's run by the DA, the Democratic Alliance political party, and it's heavily criticized. So they were using the water crisis as like an example and really using that to kind of take down the DA. Even there was a lot going on politically there, and the water crisis was at the center of a lot of it. So, yeah.
For Meg, with the water. I'm John Custodio. I'm from LaGuardia Community College. So, in terms, did you speak with anyone in Mexico City, like just passersby, citizens, and do they see the water crisis as big of an issue as it should be seen?
So I spent most of my time in the rural community with the Mazawa, but my translator was from Mexico City, and I think he was kind of shocked. Like, he didn't really realize how big of an issue it was. And there are definitely areas of Mexico City that struggle, like, hugely with this water crisis. There are people in Mexico City who don't have access to water. So they still need to better the system for those communities as well. It's a lot of communities in poverty that don't have water. So I think, I think there's a lot that they still need to do more conservation in Mexico City. I think because they have this expansive system, they're like, oh, we're good, we figured it out. But it's like, it's not a sustainable solution.
Okay, I have a couple more questions, but does anybody here have a question? Yes.
Hi, I'm Liz. I'm one of the Columbia Fellows. This is for Tomas.
Stand up.
Oh, okay. I'm Liz. I'm one of the Columbia Fellows again. This is for Tomas. So someone who has been to Puerto Rico and saw outside intervention, NGO efforts, as well as more sustainable community efforts. I'm wondering, how you see this playing out. What's sustainable, and I don't know, what do you see as future solutions, and if any?
Well, I don't want to undermine the efforts that are being undertaken by these small grassroots organizations now, but a lot has to happen from above, federally. Jose Andres suggested a Marshall Plan that, and also a full, so a Marshall Plan, and that's a good question.
Okay, I have a question for Rohan, and you said that when you started out choosing your project, you were thinking about the global north versus the global south. And I'm wondering if in that pre-reporting phase, you were tempted to report on another country from the global north instead of the UK or London, or what you can tell us about pollution problems in the global north.
Yeah, I think I was sort of interested in London because of the historical component as well. But I think, it makes sense, the attention that we're paying to climate change and global warming in the global south, but I worry sometimes that an unintended effect of that is the implicit assumption that individuals in maybe the US or in Europe are, quote, safe from climate change. So I think that was something that I wanted to go into the project investigating and maybe at the end dispel. I think also, which relates to one of the earlier questions, I think especially sort of in the US and London, air pollution and air quality maybe is something that we don't talk about as much, because in many cities here we don't necessarily feel that bad when we go outside immediately. So in London, on a very polluted day with a very low rating on the air quality index, you can still walk outside and feel normal, versus the type of pollution in cities like Beijing or New Delhi is you're much more able to feel it when you walk outside. So I do think that distinction is relevant to how we perceive those issues too.
Did you all have any questions for each other, or any comments on each other's presentations? And are there any more questions out here?
Hi there, I'm Jared from Flagler College. So I was a little bit curious for Rohan on did I say it correctly?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. On the London smog. Obviously, unfortunately, in the United States, the rhetoric on climate change is very much bifurcated along a partisan line, and it's really difficult to move forward. From what you saw with the citizens in London, is it divided in a similar manner as in the Tories and the Labour Party? They see it in a very different light, or is this more of a bipartisan issue for the people who do pay attention?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think it is still somewhat divided but I would say really between sort of a city and maybe more federal levels. So I think residents in London feel strongly about air quality and seem to know quite a bit about air quality and air pollution. London's mayor has issued many very strongly worded statements about air pollution, but the federal government has really not acted and has been reluctant to impose either taxes on diesel motor vehicles or implementing other sorts of air pollution regulations. So I think that divide definitely exists, probably somewhat differently than in the US, but is still somewhat resonant, yeah.
Jonathan?
I have to do another introduction, or is that cool?
I think it's cool.
All right. So you were mentioning the mayor's efforts in trying to decrease the air pollution there, and it's Sadiq Khan, right? That's his name? All right. So you mentioned that diesel, the gas for the fuel, is really what's contributing to now as opposed to the Great Smog. So are there any efforts, I might have missed it, but to curtail the amount of diesel that's being released into the air?
Yeah, so I think one of the main, probably the principal measure that's being taken is the implementation of clean air zones. So these are basically zones cordoned off in London where you may not be able to drive a diesel vehicle, or you'll have to pay a very high tax. And so those are in a few areas of London, and activist groups have been calling for those to expand all across the city of London. But that's the main tangible thing that's being done.
More questions? I think maybe as a wrap-up, do you all want to each talk about grassroots solutions, which I know several of you alluded to? So anything that you see happening in the country where you were doing your reporting, and this is just like a wrap-up statement. You may have gone into some detail during the presentation, but just something to leave us with. And we'll start with Jack. Oh,
Could I just ask them to also add if they've placed their, I know you listed where all your pieces have run, but anyone else? Hi everyone, congratulations on your work. I'm Indira Lakshmanan. I wanted to ask, I saw Jackie, was it Jackie? No, I'm sorry, it was Kiley who listed all the places where your story has run. The rest of you, where are you making efforts to have your stories placed, and any just quick thoughts on anything you learned on the journalism side?
So let's start with Jackie.
Okay, so my main article was published with the Johns Hopkins Global Health Now publication. But I am pushing for, when I get back, I want there to be some policies at my college, at least starting there, to change the way we're using our water. I'm giving this talk a few different times over the next couple of weeks on my campus, as well as some other topics that I wanted to cover when it comes to water use. And just starting on my campus and then hopefully going bigger than that.
Well, I am still finishing up my film, so I'm still, brainstorming about where I'd like it to go. If anyone has thoughts, that'd be cool. But yeah, and then when it comes to grassroots efforts, I learned a lot from yours. I think it was really discouraging to see in Mexico how much of it was tied up in the politics, and how it's been like this forever, and that the Mizawa are probably not going to get the access that they're looking for, or it's just going to be a continuous struggle. But I do hope to keep advocating for better water use as well.
I don't know if mine works though. Okay.
But you have a very good voice anyway, so we heard it.
Good. Screaming at everyone. Yeah, I'm Kiley. As I mentioned, Manga Bay originally published my piece, which is a science conservation outlet. But then it was republished by Pacific Standard Asian Correspondent, and then the Thai Embassy. And also Yale has a religion and ecology department, and they republished it as well. But as regards to grassroots campaigns, I think that initially the start was with rituals like tree ordinations, and they've started to expand to different rituals as well. But that was also just a start. I think a lot more monks are willing to move into the political arena, and they do have that respect kind of innately already there, so people are willing to listen to them. and then kind of removing the stigma of engaged Buddhists, which is just Buddhists that are willing to participate in activism. A lot more are stepping out, and it's less about removing yourself from society and more about ending suffering, like I said before. So, thanks.
As of now, my article is just on the Pulitzer Center, but I'm reaching out to Winston-Salem Journal to have that published. I think through this experience, well, it was a very uplifting experience, and I think what most impressed me was how the smallest grassroots organizations would work with global nonprofits to get the job done.
Hold the mic closer. That's all I know.
Okay. So my story was republished by Pacific Standard magazine, thanks to Kem. And I think in response, Kem, to your question about grassroots activism, one of the things that I saw in London was really a lot of effort being done around education, primary and secondary school education, to educate children and parents about the dangers, the health effects of air pollution to children. That seemed to be happening across the country. And then, Indira, in response to your question, to what I learned about journalism, I think I definitely went in with a series of questions and story ideas of what I wanted to pursue, story angles, and I think letting the story unfold somewhat organically was something that I learned. So something I talked about in my presentation was sort of a split within the activist movement, which wasn't something that I really learned about until like 2-3 weeks into being there. So sort of just understanding that a story will unfold in ways that you don't expect and to be prepared for that.
Well, thank you all very much.